Morning, everyone. So this is your last read, but it's probably not going to be. I'm probably going to have to split it into two because there's quite a few pages left to go. But there'll be two last reads for this Dreamsnatcher. We're on to chapter 27, Fighting Back. What's happening to her? Siddy cried. Someone help her, make it stop. Moll's face drained of colour as the fever raged through her, forcing her body into spasms. As she writhed and twisted on the ground, Mushy dabbed her face with a wet cloth. But still the sweat poured from her forehead. Oak bent down, trying to hold Moll's body still. What's happened, boys? I don't know, Alfie said. 1 second we were talking, and then, sorry. His eyes widened as he watched Moll's head thrash back and forth. She saw something in the forest, only she couldn't work out what it was. Spit frothed up between Moll's teeth, and the muscles in her throat tensed and knotted. She began to cough and splutter. Oak propped her head up and something choked out of her mouth, a clump of half-chewed berries. Mushy looked at Oak. She's been poisoned, hadn't she? The whole camp had gathered round now. Cinderella Bull knelt down beside Moll. She placed a hand on her forehead, but Moll's eyes were wild, glowing with a savage brightness. And then, all of a sudden, Moll groaned. There's another shadow mask, she gasped. The camp strained towards her words, with a long grey mask of slate, and with clumps of dead flowers for hair, and her body started to shudder again, and she forced the words out. Rotted berries for ears, red, rotten, like blood. I saw it running through the trees. It's come for me. Oak knelt close to Moll. There's no mask, Moll. It's just us. Us. And then Mushy cried out. Moll's body wasn't shuddering or shaking now. It was growing still, frighteningly still, and her face pale. There was a growl as Griff wove in between the bodies and nuzzled against her. Get her water, Mushy told Siddy. Quick! As Siddy ran off for a bucket, Moll spoke, her voice tight and rasping, like someone was squeezing it out of her. She looked up into Griff's eyes as if only he could hear. Skull's chanting for me back in his camp. I can hear the drum and rattle. It's like he's calling only me this time, but he's stronger now. He knows my name. And it's like my mind. It's closing down. It doesn't belong to me anymore. For a second, she looked almost peaceful. There's no point fighting it. You've got to fight it, Moll, Oak said. Fight back against the Dreamsnatch. If I give up, the shadow masks will leave you alone. It's only me they're after. Don't listen, Moll, Alfie cried. Moll was silent for a few seconds as the Dreamsnatch crowded in. And then she gasped, I can see my nightmare inside my eyes, mind's eye, clearer than I've ever seen it before. She choked on her words, and when she coughed, blood stained the cloth Mushy held to her face. I can see shadow masks, but there's only 5 of them, and my parents, they're here too. Moll closed her eyes. She was sobbing now, her body contorted, and then her jaw shuddered as she fought the Dreamsnatch, trying to use its power, but not let it take her completely. Griff pawed at Moll's skirt and looked deep into her eyes. Do something, Oak, Mushy shouted. A child isn't meant to go through this. To see what she'll see, we need to help her. Cinderella Bull put her hand on her shoulder. Moll will see how the shadow masks kill, if she can handle a Dreamsnatch. It's not right, Mushy cried. Oak took Mushy's hands. Mush, we've never known the truth about how the shadow masks kill. If we know what happened to Moll's parents, we've got a chance of stopping them. Moll tore her hair against the pulsing rhythms of the Dreamsnatch, sweat glistening off her chest. She looked into Griff's eyes, begging him to rescue her, but she had to stay inside the nightmare. She knew this. Because she had to unlock the last part of her memory, she closed her eyes. Her mother was there, lying on the bank of the river, her green eyes wide with fear, as one shadow mask pinned her down by her arms and another clutched her long black hair in a fist to hold her still. Nearby was a tall, strong man, her father, and he was fighting against the other 3 shadow masks. But they had surrounded him now and were forcing him to his knees. They bound his hands and held him to the ground, and then the chant began. Tonight we summon you to finish our chant. Masters of the Soul Splinter, do what we can't. Come from the shadows, the gloom most dim. Use curses of power, deadly and grim. Guardians of the bones before you lie. Fill them with darkness so much that they die. Pour out our shadows into each soul. Kill all that is living, turn it blacker than coal. And from the shadows came a figure with wild black hair surrounding a mask of charcoaled wood like burnt skin. It prowled forward, drawing in the enormous leathery wings that jutted from its back and trailed along the ground. In its long, thin fingers, the figure held a splinter of black ice that didn't seem to melt. It stole closer to Moll's parents, its mask raised high, and then it towered over Moll's mother, lifting the soul splinter above her mouth. Moll's mother screamed, but the shadow masks held her fast, and as she panted into the night, the soul splinter began to melt, and droplets of black liquid dripped into her mouth. Her eyes widened, drowning in horror. Then she lay still. Her father recoiled as the soul splinter came towards him, but he was powerless against the shadow masks, and, like droplets of death, the ice fell into his mouth. Moll watched as a blanket of darkness enfolded the scene. And then she screamed. This isn't my nightmare anymore. It's gone. It's just the Dreamsnatcher now, and I can't escape it. She ripped at her ears, thrashing her head from side to side. I can hear Skulls chanting and muttering. I can hear the wax squelching through his fingers, and I can hear another voice. It's the shadow masks. Within the face of Slate, I've just seen. He's saying my name, like he's come for me. Moll struggled to get up, but Oak pinned her down. He's saying it over and over again. Hemlock's come for you, Moll. Give yourself up to the Dreamsnatcher. Moll's body began to shake uncontrollably. Help me, Griff, help me! Griff wrapped his body round Moll's, but she continued to shudder, wrestling beneath his weight. Fight it, Moll, Oak cried. You can beat it. Cinderella Bull bent closer over the strawberries Moll had spat out, and then she gasped. These berries aren't what they seem. See here? These white seeds? I'd know them anywhere. They're hemlock seeds, poisonous seeds, and they've been growing inside our berries. Oak's face was grave. The second shadow masks come for Moll in the very form of his name. And then it dawned on Alfie clear as day. He limped away from the gathering and up the steps to Moll's wagon. Moments later he returned with a small phial of black liquid. Mushy looked at him guardedly. Beneath him Moll was crying out against the Dreamsnatcher, tossing from side to side. Melantha gave it to us, Alfie explained as he unscrewed the lid. She said Moll'd need it. You'll need it when you're there fighting for your mind. Maybe it's a cure for the hemlock berry. Cinderella Bull blinked. An antidote for the poison? Alfie nodded. No one moved. Alfie could sense and feel their distrust, but it was Griff who acknowledged him first. He stepped back from Moll and stood before Alfie with shining eyes, Moll's eyes, and then he dipped his head. Go on. We trust you. Alfie bent over Moll and tipped the black liquid into her mouth. For several seconds Moll continued to shudder and shout, but as the antidote felt its way into her body, the fever withdrew and she lay on the ground, panting but free. The shadow masks had come for her, but she'd broken their Dreamsnatcher, and beyond the river, in the darkened lair, Skull and Hemlock knew it. Chapter 28. The Soul Splinter. It was night, but no one slept. Even the youngest members of the camp lay awake in their wagons, wide-eyed with fear. Griff sat back from the campfire, facing out towards the trees, his ears swivelling at the slightest noise, and around the fire, sitting on tree stumps, were the elders, together with Moll, Alfie, and Siddy. Hard Times Bob puffed on his pipe. You did well, Moll, fighting back against the Dreamsnatcher like that. Moll pulled the rug tighter around her. I don't understand why the Dreamsnatcher opened up the last bits of my nightmare. Why did the shadow masks want me to know about the soul splinter? Cinderella Bull stroked the fire and her gold pelly shawl jangled. They don't. The shadow masks wanted you to give yourself up to Hemlock's poison and their Dreamsnatcher. They thought, now they know your name, they'd be strong enough to destroy your mind, but you fought back before they could work their curse in full, and in fighting back so hard you uncovered the memory they wanted you to forget. Griff crept towards the fire and burrowed beneath Moll's rug, away from the eyes of the camp. Then he leant against Moll's legs. Alfie frowned. But the hemlock inside the berries, how did they get it in here? You've got your people guarding the camp from their trees the whole time. Oak shook his head. Hemlock didn't need to touch those berries or even come close to the camp. He must have worked his curse from a distance, and that's when Moll saw him behind the trees. Siddy shifted on his stool, cuddling his earthworm close. And to think poor Porridge the second could have eaten those berries. Patty threw him a scathing look. Alfie turned to Cinderella Bull. This soul splinter, the shard of black ice that one of the shadow masks stripped into Moll's parents' mouths. How can something like that kill people? Cinderella Bull was silent for several seconds, then she looked at Moll. You know, don't you, child? Moll looked down at her toes and nodded. How do you know? Siddy asked. Moll looked up. Because I felt it, the horror and the darkness all seeping into my bones at once, and I heard their chant, the one worse than the Dreamsnatcher. She took a deep breath, and beneath her rug, Griff wound his tail round her ankle. The soul splinter is filled with the darkest curse. Cinderella Bull nodded. There'll be curses in there darker than the deepest night, more rotten than decaying fungus. Moll shrank further inside her rug. The shadow masks tore away their shadows, their souls, for a reason. She paused. They've locked them inside the soul splinter, and that's how they kill. They drip their cursed souls into the mouths of their victims, and the darkness that grows in them is too much for any living soul. The fire crackled onto the inky darkness, but no one spoke. Then Alfie rummaged in his pocket and drew out the tattered rag Melantha had given them, on which was written, "Shadow Masks." Limping, he pulled his stool near Moll's. "The letters," he said quietly. "S is for skull, H for hemlock." Eyes widened. "Just like Melantha said, think about the letters, the word. It's all there. It's a pattern, isn't it?" Cinderella Bull peered at the rag, then nodded grimly. "And you've got to see it through." Siddy pointed the letters. "If Skull came with the Dreamsnatch and Hemlock with the poison, maybe every shadow mask has a different curse. Who does the soul splinter belong to?" Moll shuddered. "The master. That's what the others called him." She looked up at Oak. "But I saw something else. Something I know you saw too when you found my parents. Something which none of us will know how to explain." Oak hung his head. Mushy raised her hand to her mouth. "The shadow mask had shaved my parents' head." And to that, not even Cinderella Bull had the answer. As they made their way to their wagon, Cinderella Bull stopped in her tracks. She was clasping her obsidian fortune-telling ball, and her eyes were closed. "Oak?" she said. Oak hurried over, and Moll followed with Griff. "I can see them coming. It's clear as if I'm looking at a picture." Her voice sounded distant, like an echo. Skull and all of his gang, with the hounds at their feet, straining forward on their leashes. "They know," Moll broke their dream snatch. "They'll come from the deep wood, and they'll come tonight." Her voice stopped suddenly, like a tap being turned off, and her eyes opened. They flitted over Moll's and Griff's faces, and they rested upon Oak. "We haven't got much time." Chapter 29, Waiting for the Ambush. Night deepened. Oak's camp was silent and still, as if holding its breath. Tucked up in the branches of the sacred oaks, they waited. Mist slunk into the clearing below them, settling on the branches of the trees like an unwanted guest. All of the wagons had been bolted, and the cobs and greyhounds tethered to trees hidden deep within the ancient wood. Even the chickens, and, on Siddy's insistence, Porridge the Second had been caged up and concealed. The embers of a fire glowed in the middle of the clearing, turning the hanging mist to amber, and far above this, Moll, Griff, and Alfie crouched inside the biggest of the sacred oaks. Siddy had been prized away into another tree to take care of his baby sister, but on the branch below, Moll, Cinderella Bull, Mushy Oak, and their sons huddled. Griff leant into Moll, and she ran a hand along his back. He'd keep her safe. She'd seen him leap from the tallest branches of a beech tree and land on his feet unscathed. She tucked her knees under her chin as so long as Griff was with her. She'd be all right. "It must be past midnight now," Moll whispered. "Perhaps they're not going to come after all." Alfie shifted beside her, and the leaves on the branch trembled, as if they too knew what was coming. Skull will come. He always does. "And you think Cinderella's bull plan is really going to work?" A branch cracked beneath them. "It'll work, Moll." It was Mushy's voice, but Moll noticed that even she couldn't mask the fear that had settled over the camp like a hard frost. Seconds later, it came. At first, it was the pounding of hooves they heard. Then came the feverish shriek of the hounds. Whips cracked, shattering the stillness, and the hounds bayed louder. But there were no voices. Skull's gang approaching the camp in a terrifying wave of silence. Moll's palms were hot and her heart thudding inside her. No one moved or uttered a word within the trees, exactly as they'd planned. The beating of hooves was louder now, and closer. Then, bursting through the mist, Moll saw the dark shapes of Skull and his gang, urging on their cobs. 6 hooded shapes thundered towards them. Skull, Gobbler, Brunt, the other 2 boys, and Moll's heart raced. The second shadow mask. The hounds rampaged through the forest and stormed into the clearing, tearing at their leashes, their teeth bleached against the night. And then, suddenly, they were still. One of the riders threw back his hood. Skull's white mask hung in the mist. "The cowards are locked inside their wagons." His voice, brittle, like dried-out clay. Gobbler's hunchback was a shadowy bulge in the darkness, and beside him was a man with a mask of slate, a jutting mouth and gaping eye-holes, clumps of dead flowers for hair, and poisonous berries rotting away where ears should have been. Hemlock. And he was muttering under his breath. Almost at once, Moll felt his curse. Crawling through the night to her soul, feeding on her fear. Come to us, Mull Pecksniff, you're ours now. You're not one of them, you never will be, and so long as you stay here, you put them all in danger. Come away now, give yourself up to our curse. Moll's mind raced. She was safe, tucked up inside the highest oak, but every fibre in her body wanted to climb down and give herself up. As if he sensed this, Griff put 2 legs in front of her. His claws dug into the bark, but it would only be a matter of time before Hemlock's curse sought him out too. Moll wanted to shake Griff to make him understand. What chance did any of them have against the shadow masks, their curses, against the soul splinter? And then Griff began to shudder as Hemlock's curse hunted him down. We've come for Moll's Pecksniff and her wildcat, Oak, shouted Skull. If you give them up now, we'll leave you and your camp in peace. Moll could feel Griff's heart thumping with her own, and then Hemlock spoke, his words slithering over tongue like venom. If you refuse to hand over the girl and the beast, every wagon in this clearing will be savaged by the hounds. Moll thought of her box bed, of the catapults Oak had carved for her, and the mounds of feathers and fir cones she'd collected over the years. And then she thought of Mushi's wagon, her finest china, her precious lace, and the bobble fringe curtains. She wanted to leap down through the branches and hug Mushi tight. Cinderella's bull's plans had to work. It had to. You give us no choice, Oak, Skull shouted. Drop the leashes, boys. Moll held her breath. A second later, the night was filled with terrible baying. Skull and Hemlock laughed, a clash of shrill, hideous laughter, as 4 blackened shapes raced up the wagon steps. Moll covered her eyes. She couldn't bear to watch. The hounds stopped baying suddenly, and into the silence of the clearing came the sounds of jaws working. Greedily, furiously, slabs of meat left on the steps of every wagon. Moll's heart leapt. The riders shifted on their cobs. Moll could hear Cinderella Bull whispering to Oak, "It should work." A wisp of mist, the silver of a moonbeam, a spoonful of midnight dew, a drop of sap from each of the sacred oaks, a pail of crystal clear river water. I brewed the lull just as our ancestors taught us. At that second, the jaws of the hounds stopped grinding, and there were 4 loud thuds. No! Skull roared. Get over to them, boys! Brunt edged towards Mushi's wagon, where a hound lay sprawled on the steps, its eyes closed, body rising and falling gently as if it was fast asleep, and beside it was a half-chewed lump of meat. Brunt nudged the hound, but it didn't move. They've left the meat covered in something, Skull. Gobbler raced up the steps of Moll's wagon. Another sleeping hound lay before the remains of a chunk of meat. It's that juker of theirs. She's laced the meat and had sent them to sleep. Into the wagons, Skull muttered. Smash 'em up hard. A cold sweat clung to Moll's skin. Doors were wrenched off and thudded to the ground, and the night was filled with pandemonium. Hello. Furniture crashed to the floor, windows shattered, objects clattered against walls, and china was smashed to smithereens. And then there was silence. Oak! Skull roared, but it was Wisdom who answered. Skull, he replied. Moll could see Skull's mask searching through the mist. Oak's taken Moll, Wisdom said. They left as night fell. Wisdom lowered himself down several branches, and finally, as he crouched upon an outstretched branch, Skull and his gang rested their eyes on him, but he was above their grasp, and there were no hounds to sleep from now. Leave, Wisdom growled. You've destroyed our homes, and we've nothing here you want. Hemlock nudged its cob closer to the tree. A deep burning sensation throbbed inside Moll. It felt as if Hemlock was looking right at her. The wildcat and her girl could be up in the trees with you, Hemlock crooned, and we want them very much. Moll buried her face in her knees. Wisdom threw a dagger down from the branches, and it landed centimetres from Hemlock's cob. That, a warning. He spat through the leaves, then sprang up on the branch, so that he was standing. They've gone after the amulets, and they're going to find them before you break the bone murmur. You'll see. He was silent for several seconds. Leave. You've no business here. There was a murmur of voices from Skull's gang, and then Hemlock started muttering. Moll could feel her whole body weakening. Doubt, fear, and guilt flooding her thoughts. Beside her, Griff began shivering. And then Wisdom did something no member of Oak's camp had done in Moll's lifetime. He fired a gunshot into the air. Its harsh crack burst out and silenced Hemlock's curses. Moll flinched. Below her, Skull's gang shuffled backwards on their cobs, but Hemlock stood, and Skull remained rooted to the spot, unflinching. Stay away, Skull, Wisdom muttered. Moll strained her ears. She could just make out Skull's voice, a scornful hiss. Guns and knives, he mocked. You're not going to get rid of the shadow masks like that. And then, even quieter to Hemlock, we need to prepare the clearing. Moll and the wildcat will be there soon enough. He turned to Brunt and the boys. Haul the hounds up onto your cobs, they'll wake later. He jabbed a heel into his horse, then turned his head up towards Wisdom. If I find out you've lied, I'll burn your camp to the ground. With a crack of whips, Skull, Hemlock and their gang charged off into the trees with the sleeping hounds. And as if they'd been holding their breath all this time, Oak's camp finally breathed from the trees. Below Moll, Mushy was sobbing. Everyone down from the trees. Stoke up the fire and keep the children away from the wagons. But he stayed where he was for several seconds, cradling Mushy close. Moll twisted her body down between the branches with Griff, an uncomfortable lump forming in her throat. Mushy's wagon had meant the world to her. Now it lay in shreds below them, and it was all her fault. The mist had lifted, and the camp huddled round the fire. Oak's boys hurled on more and more logs until the flames towered high above them, and the clearing was once more filled with light. Even Alfie, with his bandaged leg, was throwing wood onto the fire with Siddy. A heaviness hung inside Moll, and she shuffled over towards Mushy and Oak, who were staring at the crackling flames in silence. She picked up a log and tossed it onto the fire. It's all because of me. It's not fair that Skull smashed up the wagons. None of it's fair, Moll. It's not fair Skull destroyed our homes. It's not fair you're part of something you never asked to be. But life isn't fair. Never is. Oak paused, and then looked Moll full in the face. You've got to be brave. You've got to be brave. You've got to keep going, no matter how unfair it gets. But all that work you and the camp put into making our wagons, you might as well have not bothered, Moll sniffed. Mushy shook her head. If you think like that, then you'll never build anything in your life. Moll, you build knowing things might go wrong, and sometimes it's when things get broken or lost or damaged that you realise all you've got to fight for. Moll twisted her hair into an angry knot and watched Griff as he padded round the broken steps of her smashed-up wagon. His head hung low. Excuse me. But it's causing so many problems, you hiding us away, us trying to fight back. Griff and I would be all right out there. Might get into a few scrapes, but we can hunt and stuff. Oak smiled. Did you expect it would be easy fighting back against shadow masks? He rubbed Moll's back. None of this is going to be easy or fair, but we've got to do it because the Bone Murmur is something worth fighting for. It's the old magic, and all its goodness is at stake. And no matter how scared you or how guilty you feel, you keep going and you don't give up. Because there's a chance, however small, for all of us in this, and when you've got a chance, you fight on, however ugly things get. Mushy smoothed down her pinafore. Tomorrow, we'll rebuild our wagons. They'll always be our homes, and years from now, there'll all be people who will say, Mushy Frogmore's wagon. Now that was one to remember. Moll tried to smile. She wished she would stop feeling like this, like she might burst into tears every time anyone spoke. Wisdom approached with a bundle of quilts, blankets and cushions. It's a warm night, and Skull won't be back. We'll be all right sleeping around the fire. Hours passed, and Moll waited until everyone in the camp had gone to sleep, until the night belonged to only her and Griff. We're going to find the amulets, Griff. We have to, because I won't let any more bad things happen to this camp, and I won't let my parents' death be for nothing. But across the river, in the darkness of the deep woods, Skull and Hemlock were muttering a deadly incantation, and somewhere far, far away, the master of the Soul Splinter was awakening. And that's where I'm leaving it. We'll start again on chapter 30. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.